We'll be reading 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 7 from the ESV. Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if they do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold and jewelry, or the clothing that you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with an imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered.
Amen.
You may be seated.
All right. Good morning. Good to see you guys here. All right. You ever watch those Hallmark movies? And first of all, feel really good, while you're watching them. Like you got a nice, warm, and kind of a fuzzy feeling, and thinking, man, that's really wonderful. But then probably your next thought, if it's like mine, is, yeah, but that's really unrealistic, right? It's just life isn't like that. This little quiet, small little town where everything goes wonderfully, and everybody's got perfect lives and these types of things, and perfect family, and those all this just perfect type stuff. And it's interesting to watch those. I like watching them different times of the year, but you think about that, and kind of, even some of those with regard to motherhood, and again, families, and, it's just unrealistic. And, there can be times to where, whether it is movies like that, or TV shows, or even social media these days, to where we can get an unrealistic picture of motherhood and what it is to be a mother and a parent. And I want to read this, which is a bit more, I think, realistic to what motherhood is really like. It says, motherhood is truly set in when you offer to cut up other people's food. You hide in the bathroom to be alone. You hope ketchup is a vegetable because it's the only thing your kids will eat. You read that the average 5-year-old asks 492 questions a day, and you feel proud that your child is above average. You use your own saliva to clean your own child's face. And you count the sprinkles on each kid's cupcake to make sure they are all equal. You hear your mother's voice coming out of your mouth. You stop criticizing the way your mother raised you. You hire a sitter because you can't remember the last time when you went out alone with your husband, but then you spend half the night checking on the kids. And the last one is, you say at least once a day, I'm not cut out for this job, but you wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Maybe that's not your experience of being a parent or a mother, but I know for many, I think they can probably relate. And motherhood is not homogenous in the sense that everybody's experience is alike, but it's certainly not easy. And mothers are to be appreciated. And this month, as we noted last week, is kind of focused on mothers and motherhood and motherly figures and adopted mothers and these women in our lives. When we look at Scripture and the impact on others' lives as well, and many times that we're going to see as well as eternal lives, as we saw last week with Lois and Eunice, the grandmother and mother of Timothy. And their faith and their teaching and their impact on salvation of not just Timothy, but so many exponentially beyond just Timothy because of the man that he came up to be and his unhypocritical faith. And so, again, thinking about unrealistic sort of pictures of mothers and women and godly women, I think one of those can often be the woman in Proverbs 31, right? Maybe some of the women in here can relate when they read this passage and have heard it taught many times, like, well, that's great, it sounds wonderful, but it's a bit perhaps unrealistic and unattainable. And in some ways, I think it is the epitome, right, of what a godly woman is. And to me, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think it relates sort of to Jesus in the sense that, right, Jesus is perfect. And this is almost, right, a description of a perfect wife and a perfect mother and a perfect woman. And so I think there's been some who maybe feel discouraged and like, well, I could never reach that. And so while Jesus is our example, I think this description of this woman in Proverbs 31 can be something similar in that it can be, right, an example, right, a description of what to strive for. And while we may fall short, why some wives and mothers may not attain to every single aspect of this all the time, it is a good sort of goal and aspiration and a reminder of what is being described in this chapter. It is the last chapter in the book of Proverbs, the last words in the book of Proverbs. And that is interesting to me. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to look at 12 descriptions, 12 descriptors, if you will, of this woman, this godly woman. I don't want to call her perfect because no woman is perfect, and the description of this woman wasn't perfect either. But I think she is being described as a godly woman. And so many of the women in our lives and in this congregation are just that as well. They are godly women. And I think it's important to note just a couple aspects of what is being described here. And the first is that so verses 10 through 31, first is that it is an acrostic. Okay, this is wisdom literature, it's poetry, and this is an acrostic poem. And what that means is that each verse starts with a successive letter of the Hebrew alphabet, starting with Aleph and then going all the way to the end. And so it's interesting to think of. It's a brilliant display of Hebrew poetry. So it is an acrostic, but it's also a chiasm. It's also a chiasm. And if you're unfamiliar with that, what it is, it's sort of like this. You could maybe look at it like a pyramid to where it starts. It could be an inverted pyramid, to the side, kind of like maybe a greater than sign, if you will, of going down, and to where there's some parallel structure on each side, and then there's a crescendo to where one verse, and we're going to see that in verse 23, is kind of the core verse that everything else will feed off of. And so I say all that just to throw that out there. It's not really all that important unless you're interested in those kinds of things. It's neat. It is the way it is written. But perhaps more importantly, I think for at least this morning, is that to really whom this is being spoken to. Okay, and Proverbs is written to, it's written by Solomon and to his sons. It says here in verse 31 and verse 1 that these are the words of King Lemuel, the oracle. Okay, and many speculate that this is just another name for Solomon. It may be somebody else. I probably fall in the Solomon camp, but which says that the oracle which his mother taught him. Okay, and she goes on to say, what, O my son, and what, O son of my womb, and what, O son of my vow. So these are the words of his mother, right? And so talking about don't give your strength to women, and really making sure you're staying on track. And then so in verse 10, he's gonna this mother of his, this king, is gonna describe what in her opinion, okay, and this is important, right? So this is a mother who is telling her son, this is the kind of woman that you should strive to find to be your wife. And I think many parents, and especially mothers, can probably relate to where if your child is getting married, you want them to have, right, a godly spouse and one that will help them along their journey. And so that's what is being described here, okay? It is from the viewpoint of a mother and her opinion about what is a godly wife for her son. And so maybe it's a little bit, right, over the top, but parents have high expectations, and certainly mothers do for their children and their children's spouses. And so that's what it is. I want to notice 12 characteristics here. So we're going to go through these quick. I know that's a lot, but we're going to look at 12 of them. The first is this woman and her worth. Number one is her worth, verse 10 through 12. So an excellent wife, who can find? For her worth is far above jewels, or maybe yours says far above rubies. So an excellent wife, who can find? You think about seeking the world for great riches and great treasures, and there is nothing, right, greater to this mom, at least, than to find a godly wife for her son. And it is a quest to find this, and it can be a struggle. You know, I've got a friend who I've known him for 30 plus years, and he has struggled time and time again with his relationships and the women he chooses to be in relationships with. And it has brought him many challenges in his life. And many of the problems he's got have been brought upon himself, just as mine were and a lot of ours are. But in some cases, these women he has sought and found, right, are still impacting his life in ways that are bringing him stress. And so an excellent wife, who can find? It is interesting, we look back to some of this connection. Some would say this is the epitome of wisdom, right? It is a parallel to the discussion of wisdom that is being discussed earlier in the Proverbs. And similar to wisdom, this excellent wife is being described to where that if it is found, wisdom is found, they find favor with the Lord. So this wife, right, if you find her, you too are going to be blessed and find favor with the Lord. An excellent wife is described back in chapter 12 as the crown of her husband, right? Again, the value, the worth of such a woman in a man's life. It's far above rubies, far above jewels. And verse 11, the heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. Can you place a value on a reality such as that? To where the heart of her husband, he will always trust in her, both in a fidelity sense to not, to not commit adultery, but I think even more than that, with the family's businesses, the family's business. And I don't even necessarily mean that in like a commerce sense, but just doing what is good for the family. And he will have no lack of gain. Right? A woman who is always bringing value and benefit to the family. And so, verse 12, she does him good and not evil all the days of her life. I think that is significant. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. You know, those of you who have been married, I've got a neighbor who his wife has passed and not long ago, and he said that they were married just shy of 60 years. And he's having a hard time with that naturally. But as marriage progresses and time goes on, and our lives change, the situations change, the seasons in our lives change, and physically we change. But what I love about this is, despite, right, maybe the fact that this woman, all the days of her life, right, she could, from beginning to the day she said, I do, and they were wed in the eyes of God and others, to the day that she goes to be with God, she is always bringing him good, her husband, and not evil. what value can be placed on that? She could be, her hair could be turning from auburn to gray and more wrinkles on her face and, the walking a bit slower, but she is still doing her husband good and not evil all the days of her life. So worth number one. Number two is her work, verses 13 through 15. She looks for wool and flax and works with her hands, notice, in delight, right? She finds this a joy and she finds happiness in working for her family and seeking the things that her family needs. And so, like verse 14, she is like those merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. At times maybe there's food on the table, there's meals prepped, and you ever been there in your family, and maybe even it could be a certain gathering, an occasion to where you're like, wow, how did Mom do this? Where did all this food come from? Where did she find the time to prepare all this? That's what godly women do. That's what mothers do. Is you may not know how or where, but they make it happen, and that's what this, I think, is describing on some level here. And so verse 15, she rises also while it is still night and gives food to her household and portions to her maidens, or she's giving out duties to her maidens. Her work, she's not beyond getting up early and doing work, even though she does have some servants, it appears. She's still working with her own hands and her own aspirations and her own responsibilities. And she gets up before the sun comes up, and she prepares the food for her household, and she is working. A godly woman finds herself working for the Lord and for her family. Number three is her wisdom. Verses 16 through 17. She considers a field and buys it. From her earnings, she plants a vineyard. So she has wisdom in a way that can help her family financially. This wisdom comes from her, I think, trust in God and her the abilities that God has given her. And these other things are compounding upon one another, but she considers a field and buys it. And thinking about this, and when it was written, we talked about who wrote it and whom they are speaking to, and the words of whom they are, but this was some 3,000 years ago. Okay? We read that passage Marty did from 1 Peter, that was 2,000 years ago. And many look at those passages in the world today and say, look, women, right, the Bible, God, the women, Christianity, the Hebrew Scriptures, they are so oppressing of women. They don't allow women to do anything. Well, that's not the woman being described here. This woman has abilities. She has the wisdom to engage in business and purchase properties for her family and bring her family good tidings and good things. From her own earnings, we'll see a bit of where that comes from in a little while as well. And so she plants a vineyard. She's thinking long term as well with her wisdom. But also verse 17, she girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong. Now, we can maybe look at this in different ways, but I think there is wisdom in this, in that why do you think she is girding herself with strength and makes her arms strong? Why? Well, those of you who are mothers probably know that at times you need physical strength to care for your children and do all this work that needs to be done in the house, right? For many years, I thought my mom was the strongest person that I knew. Physically. There's wisdom in that. And I'd like to make a side point, and I don't think this is what this verse is talking about, but I do think there is a principle here that goes beyond just this woman and the godly woman, and that is for all of us, and to think about the wisdom involved in us being the temple of God and being the people of God and the church of God, and caring for our physical well-being and understanding what we know now about so much of the food in the world and the things going on, and that right? To really strain from that and to work to be physically healthy and what we're putting into our bodies. You know, this was discussed a couple Wednesdays ago. And on our bodies and in our bodies and caring for ourselves, for our children, for our families, and for the Lord. We are the temple of the Lord. And so that's just a side note. Maybe you can think about that a bit more. But wisdom. She has great wisdom. And again, the connection with wisdom, we're going to see more on it in just a minute. So number 4 is her commitment, verses 18 through 19. Her commitment. So 18, she senses that her gain is good. I think there's more wisdom here as well. But her lamp does not go out at night. So not only is she waking up before the sun comes up, but even after the sun goes down, she's still finding herself working if there is a need. And I don't think this is describing, right, that every night, all night, she just doesn't ever sleep. But, right, if there is a need, an occasion that arises, much like I'm sure you've seen husbands, your wives, and your mothers at times when you were growing up, as I do with my wife, to where in the middle of the night she's up doing stuff, right? Cleaning the house, or, you know, she's got to find the time to do it, right, when she feels that she's able to do so. In verse 19, she stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hands grasp the spindle. This is, right, a time when there weren't big box stores and shopping malls and Amazon. And so much of the clothing they had to make on their own. And so she's committed to doing that for her family. Okay? Whatever is needed, whenever it is needed, she's committed. A godly woman is a committed woman. Number 5 is her compassion. This stands out to me. Verse 20. So she extends her hand to the poor. You think about this, these strong hands, these strong arms that she is making of herself, to where she is committed, right, at wee hours to working for her family, and yet she still extends her hands to the poor. She's doing all of this for her husband and for her family and for the Lord, and yet she still has the compassion to extend her hand to the poor, and she stretches out her hands to the needy. So she's not forgetting about the importance of what we've been discussing downstairs of true religion. True religion, of helping those who are truly in need, and showing mercy, right, just as Jesus spoke about during the Sermon on the Mount. Number 6 is her confidence. Verses 21 through 22. She shows confidence, and she possesses confidence. She is not afraid of the snow for her household. You know, so the changing of the seasons, the cold is coming, the snow is coming. Well, she is not concerned about that. She's not afraid of that. Why? Because all her household are clothed with scarlet. And her confidence comes from that God is blessing her with the materials, right, with the finances, with the abilities, with the strength, with the time that she is able to find to do these things for her house and to make the proper clothing for her family. She has confidence. In verse 22, she makes coverings for herself as well, and her clothing is fine linen and purple. I think she has confidence in her own appearance as well. And, you know, that passage from Peter, as well as a parallel passage in 1 Timothy chapter 2, right? There's a discussion about, right, proper adornment of a woman. And it doesn't mean that a woman can't ever wear the things that she thinks are nice and care for herself, and that she should always neglect her appearance. It's a matter more of the heart. And we're going to see, right, I think what this woman cares more about. She finds herself being able to make these clothes for herself as well and treat herself to some nice things from time to time. And that's okay, and she's confident in that. Number 7 is her focus, verse 23. And again, this is, right, the top of that crescendo of that chiasm. And so some say, like, this is kind of the core of this entire passage. Verse 23, her husband is known in the gates. This is her focus. I think, more than anything. You call it her understanding of her God-given role. Rich talked about God's order, God's design, when he sits among the elders of the land. So her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. Now, we've already read so much about what this woman is doing in her life and caring for her family and her children and herself and her maidens, and she's making clothes and making food. But at the end of the day, I think she's doing all of this, right? Yes, for the Lord first and foremost, but in the back of her mind, maybe in the forefront of her mind, she has a focus of, I want all these things to bring honor to my husband. He is my husband. I am created by God to be a helper to him, to be a suitable helper for my husband. And so thinking about that in terms whether you are a wife or even a husband, and this I think applies to children as well, are our actions and is our focus on bringing honor to our parents, to our spouses, to my husband, to my wife, right? So that the others, right, know, as Boaz said to Ruth, to tie back into this idea of an excellent wife. In Ruth chapter 3, this is a bit of a plug of a coming lesson as well, that Boaz told Ruth, right after she made the attempt to swoon him, was, everything you say I will do, and that I know, right, as does the whole community, that you are an excellent woman. So a godly woman presents herself and behaves in such a way that her husband is honored by the people in the community, by his friends, by his, right, the people that he associates with, because of the wife that he has, and that she is a godly wife. But also we see her finances, verse 24. So she makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies belts to the tradesmen. So I think about this in the terms of how she buys that field, right? She considers a field and buys it, verse 16, from her earnings. You know, maybe you could see sort of a picture here to where, right, her and her family and her husband are sitting down at the dinner table one night, and she brings herself to tell her husband, hey, I've purchased a field. I purchased a piece of property. And maybe you can see the husband saying, well, how? Where did the money come from? And I can't help but think that maybe in some way, right, she's humble and she's shy in the sense that, well, you know, my husband, I've been, unbeknownst to you, perhaps, maybe he does know, but I've been making clothes and I've been selling them, and I've been, right, trading in business with the things that I've been able to make, and with that money, right, this wasn't a burden upon the family. With that money, I purchased this property for our family. But we see number 9 is, I think, her true fancy, right? We talked about those fancy clothes, but what is, to use that term, what is her true fancy? Verse 25, strength and dignity are her clothing, and she smiles at the latter days. So yes, she might treat herself with her own hands and with her own earnings to some nice things, but she is, as was discussed, truly adorning herself. And what she most fancies is her strength, I think her inner strength, and her dignity, right? Her morals, her dignity. They are her clothing. And she smiles at the latter days. You know, she also fancies the coming of the future, because she knows that God is with her and that God has blessed her and will continue to bless her. And so, number 10, we see her professing, okay, the things that she is saying. And so she opens her mouth, verse 26, in wisdom. And the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. So not only is the godly woman a hard worker, a committed woman to her family and to her husband, and she does focus on honoring him, and that her actions and her worth is far above rubies, and she has compassion for the poor, but she is also one who, when she speaks in wisdom. She has wise words that come out of her mouth, and she also is teaching, right, the things of kindness, justice and mercy and peace. And it can be, I think, I would imagine, an easy thing to be doing all of this that is being described here, and to feel overburdened, to feel overwhelmed, to feel bitter maybe at times, and to be overworked perhaps, and to think, well, I have a right to say the things that I want to say. And the Bible speaks plenty about the words that are coming out of our mouth. We're getting ready to see this in James as well. And then number 11 is her protecting. Verse 27. So she looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. She is a protector of her family, of her abode, her hens and her house. She looks well to the ways of her household. There's a recent trend on social media about mama bears, and we saw this a lot over the last several years with the things going on in the schools, and how I think there was even a group or something that called themselves the mama bears, and were going around and speaking out in public and protecting their family and their kids, in the home and out of the home as well. The last thing we notice is not just her professing, not just her protecting, but is the praising that she receives and that she deserves, quite frankly, the praising that comes her way. And we see this from several areas. The first is the praising from her children. It says, verse 28, that her children rise up and bless her. Her children rise up and bless her. What does that say to you? If the conduct of a woman is such to the extent of godliness and protection and mercy and worth and wisdom, that her children notice this, right? This is something that is terrifying to me as a father, that our children are witnessing every single thing in the homes that we are really doing, and the way we're behaving, and that it is going to impact them, and they're going to grow up to emulate a lot of these things. And it says what one generation abuses in moderation, the next will abuse in excess. And I think that's true in several ways, right? But her children rise up and bless her. I can't say enough about my mother. And I mentioned last week that she fell away after she married my father, and but that she did come back to the Lord. But there was a time when my father left our family. I can remember that day like it was yesterday. And we got home from school, and his truck was sitting in the driveway, and he was off work early. He was never home this early, and said, as we were pulling up, well, why is Dad home? And little did we know that he was home because he was packing up his things and telling us all that he was leaving. And that broke my mother. And then her father died not long after that. And that was, I think, one of the most challenging times in her life. And it was for my sister and I as well. And while I know she was broken, it showed physically on her. She picked herself up. She went to nursing school to be able to provide for my sister and I. And then she found a husband, and they found the Lord and came back to God, and ever since have been striving to be the example. Even when myself and even my sister pushed back, and I pushed back a lot and mocked them a lot. But every reason to bless her. But not only do her children, but it says that her husband also, he praises her, he blesses her. And notice this is probably a passage you're familiar with. Many daughters have done nobly, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. If you want to write or circle anything or write anything down from this lesson at all, I would encourage you to write that down. And that's the foundation for all of this. It's the foundation we see in the new covenant as well for, right, why husbands should love their wives, why wives should submit to their husbands, why children should obey their parents, why we as the body of Christ should submit to one another and love one another. It's as to the Lord. It's because of our fear of the Lord, our reverence for the Lord. That's why this woman is this way. That's why she's a godly woman. It's because of her fear for her Creator. Okay, not like she's like terrified, but her overall great reverence and her fear for the God of the universe. And so she shall be praised, right? Charm is deceitful. You can find and this again, tie back, this is a mother speaking this to her son. There are many charmful women and men out there, right, who can be charming and be deceiving and say nice things and have physical beauty. And I don't believe this woman does not possess that. Okay, but what's most important and what will last all the days of her life? Well, it is a reverence for God. And so her husband also praises her because she is a godly woman who fears the Lord. It was asked to me the other day if Nadia and I had love at first sight. And I said, for me, it was. And I remember the first time I saw Nadia, it was Sunday morning worship at Bear Valley in Denver, Colorado. And she had just gotten there from Australia, and this was the first time, again, I'd met her and seen her. And it was the assembly, and she was several pews up ahead of me. I hadn't met her yet, but I saw her. I remember the dress, I think, that she was wearing, and she was sitting next to a couple other girls close to her age, and she was singing the hymns that we were singing, and she had this incredible smile on her face, and I said, that is the woman I'm going to marry. I can't say the same, that if she felt the same way when she first saw me, but sometimes women need a little more convincing. But my wife is to be praised as well because she is a woman who fears the Lord. And I've spoke many times about what I was praying about, which God brought into my life at that moment, was a wife who would love God first and foremost, even more above me, and who would help myself and my children, Lord willing, get to heaven. And I have been blessed. And lastly, right, she also receives praise from the product of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. So the things that she does, there's so much, and you guys know this, right? If you're married and if you're and children at time, I think, struggle to recognize this until maybe when they get out of the home and have children of their own, especially, to how much their parents and especially their mothers truly do. And much of it goes unnoticed. But the things that they do deserve praise and honor and recognition. And it's a small bit of what I think this holiday that we've created is about. And I just want to say how truly thankful I am for the godly women in my life and that includes so many of you and what you are doing for your families. And to remember again, like, please, don't let this passage discourage you in any way, or right? It's things that I think, and it's not a full description either. You know, there's other ways, and you know, godliness displays itself in more ways than one. And to express our gratitude for the women here who fear the Lord and are making, right, a difference. You truly are making a difference with all the things that you are doing, with your worth and your wisdom and your, right, your works and all these, your commitment to God and to teaching and making an influence. And even if your kids aren't here, right, and if they're grown, and we said this last week as well, but you are making a difference on all of us and on the kids here. And so I just want to express that gratitude again and say thank you and happy Mother's Day to all. And let us stand.